And I should probably tweet this out too. Why not? I guess, should I make a positive face? Maybe I'll make a positive face. Yeah, you're much more positive than me. I'm always making some like, oh man, they've turned it over again face. All right, share. Let us share. And people can join us too. All right, let's do a podcast here. All right, had a couple of days off, but we did not rest. We watched a ton of games over the weekend, and we want to just get right into it here, talking about some of our major impressions, teams that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet on Dunked On, do full gamers on. Where should we begin, Danny?
Well, one thing I'll note is that you and I, for like a gamer podcast, we do a lot of coordination about what we're going to watch to make sure we're on the same page. One of the things that's really fun about the opening weekend is that we don't, because the idea is that we might cover different ground. And we really did between these. You and I had a little bit of talking beforehand. And I'm thrilled that the place we're starting is a game I didn't watch. It was a game that I kind of wanted to, but I had some other focuses. And that is Portland, New Orleans, which ended up being this close, really interesting game.
Yeah, I officially had that moment, and Pels Blazers actually are playing again in about 4 hours in your favorite circumstance early. They're both going to be in Portland. And then that's actually hilarious too, because the Pels are doing that, and then they immediately come to Golden State and play 2 games in a row in Golden State on a back-to-back, both of which we're going to be at. So weird start to the season for the Pels. They blow out the Bulls, then they get 2 games in Portland, and then 2 games in Golden State, a very hot Golden State team, as we will get to. But I officially had that moment, Danny, yesterday as I was sitting down to watch games where I was like, oh my God, like, these teams have all played 3 games already. Like I've only seen one of them. Like there's this, and this is maybe it goes a little bit towards the idea that there are too many games. Like the fact that 5 days into the season, I can feel overwhelmed that like I just can't catch up with all these teams. Like there's no way even someone whose full-time job it is to do this can keep track of everything is pretty difficult. But we're going to do our best here. And we'll start with this one. This was a fascinating game. The end of it was rather noteworthy, with Brandon Ingram hitting a game winner over Anthony Simons, and then Zion blocking Anthony Simons' shot at the rim as the Blazers attempted to tie it. New Orleans was down pretty much the whole game, as we'll get to. But I think actually the biggest takeaway that I had in this one was this was easily, I thought, I mean, obviously I haven't watched every game of his. I thought this is the best game I ever saw Scoot Henderson play.
Yay! Scoot's line, so we have it. 15 points, 7 of 9 from the field, 1 of 3 from 3, so most of his damage inside the arc. 6 assists, 3 turnovers, 3 steals.
And I hope that this might presage something. And this is only the second game for the Blazers. The first game, Scoot, they were getting completely blown out. He, I think, was 7 of 18 from the field against Golden State. But it actually kind of reminded me a little bit of what I saw Shaedon Sharpe do last year a couple of times, although this was against a much better opponent in New Orleans, that Scoot Henderson actually was like making the defense deal with him. Like they actually had to like call timeouts because he was hurting them. And New Orleans, one of the things we talked about with them, particularly with Trey Murphy out, and now with DeJounte Murray out as well, 4 to 6 weeks, he had the surgery on the broken hand, is they are pretty small in the backcourt. They got CJ McCollum. CJ did have a big strip on Anthony Simons, late, his former teammate, and had to go 40 minutes in this one because they're so light in the backcourt. And Jordan Hawkins, who we'll talk about as well, was also in the backcourt. And then Jose Alvarado, interestingly, only played 13 minutes, despite the fact that they were kind of getting lit up. But Scoot was actually lighting up Alvarado, which I thought was very interesting. So basically he just was blowing by guys. He was just really physical. He was quick. His handle looked tight. They were involving him in pick and roll a lot of times with smaller guards to get smaller players onto him. And then he was either rejecting the screen or just like when another guard would switch onto it, just blowing by guys. Like it was really a problem for New Orleans. Maybe not a great sign for New Orleans defense in some ways, but he just looked really fast. And then he would get in the lane in conventional pick and roll, did a great job with some passes to Ayton, although Ayton really struggled overall. He missed a lot of the easy buckets that Scoot was setting up. And so I think Scoot's defense is getting better. Also, like he just looked like a man out there. And it wouldn't surprise me, honestly, because I've talked about this a lot, if just all the injuries with Scoot really kind of sapped his athleticism a year ago. And now just having a full off season to work, he just looks bigger and stronger. And he's not like a Ja Morant level of athlete. Like no one is, as we will talk about, I'm sure, extensively a little bit later on this show. But like he looked like a guy who was really going to use his athleticism to bother teams and then also was capable of showing some pick and roll craft, putting guys in jail, finding the roll man. I mean, this isn't a Blazers team that has a lot of shooters. And so he actually earned the close. He came off the bench. Like some of the Blazers' best moments were with him at the controls. And then at the end, he just never touched the ball. Like it's one of my least favorite things that coaches do is just, okay, I'm going to put this player in the game. Like he's earned it, or, whatever your thoughts, like, oh, this is our 5 most talented players. But then someone like Scoot Henderson, there's no reason to have him in the game if he's just never going to touch the ball. If you're just going to give the ball to Anthony Simons in a high pick and roll every time, and Simons was 6 out of 20 in this game, although he did get to the foul line a lot. That's another thing we can discuss, actually, at some point, the refereeing over these first few days.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was frustrating, but this is like easily, to me, the most encouraging game that I have watched of Scoot Henderson's career, and made me even think like, oh, maybe there still is like an all-star hiding in there, possibly. I mean, it's only one game, but this is the first time I have watched him and been like, oh yeah, that's the guy.
I may go back and watch this game in part because of that, because like,
yeah. Or just watch. You can even just watch his possessions. That's
yeah.
probably all you need to
that's
do.
That's true. I could do that on Synergy. And
well, I guess the other thing too is they're going to play again, right?
Of course. But you never know.
If he does this in one game and then he doesn't do it for the next 5, it probably didn't mean anything, right?
And I was thinking about this. I watched a little bit of Blazers Warriors. It's going to be such a strange start to the season for Portland, in part because of Shaedon Sharpe missing this time. And like, I understand some of the motivations for Chauncey Billups of not starting Scoot, especially with how up and down, or mostly down, he's been before this game. But at a certain point, like, you do kind of want to evaluate that. You want to evaluate those young guys. And part of the reason why, and this has always been my incongruity / frustration with Portland, and I think this goes to ownership, is this like, well, they still have this experienced, talented front court. Remember, they traded real assets to get Denny Avdia, and then they still have Jeremy Grant, and they still have DeAndre Ayton. And so they have all these guys, and they were, of course, much more competitive in this game. And you would think that would make it easier to evaluate their young guys. And I do believe that could be true in time, but because of Shaedon's injury, it's going to take even longer.
Yeah, and a few notes on some of these other Portland guys. Avdia, nightmare game, 1 of 9. He was actually the guy that Scoot replaced in the closing lineup. And they went with Tamai Kamara. He was did a pretty good job on Zion. Part of Zion's rough night was that he couldn't make a free throw. He was 8 out of 14. He was looking pretty short, too. Didn't love that. Although I thought Zion, 29 minutes, interestingly. I was surprised that it was that few, but well,
he was starting the season. I saw something that he was starting the season on a minutes restriction because of the illness.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, this was his first game of the season. Excuse me. You're right. That's what I've watched so many games. I've forgotten that detail. So yeah, because he didn't play obviously in the first game.
Right.
And but I did think his defense was good. He had 3 blocks, including that last one. And we can talk about the very end of the game right now, where there's a 5-second differential. after CJ McCollum ties up Simons in transition and then wins the tip against him. 5-second differential. Pels get Simons to switch on to Ingram. And I thought Simons actually defended him pretty well. It was a really tough fadeaway. It got late enough in the clock that the Blazers probably should have brought a double team. But then again, this isn't, some amazing executing team at the end. And then I really hated what Chauncey Billups did. He was able to get Simons going to the rim, starting him in the backcourt with 5 seconds left. That all was fine. But the problem is he had Toumani Camara be the inbounder. And Camara is shooting better, but he still is a low volume guy. He was 1 of 2 after being 2 of 4 against Golden State in the opener. And he was doing a good job on Zion. I understand him closing. But for an offense-only possession, why would you play him instead of putting... I mean, they don't really have like a shooter off the bench. It probably would have needed to be Avdia. And Billups like, well, Avdia is 1 of 9. But the problem was Zion just... As soon as Camara inbounded the ball, Zion just ran into the lane and he just absolutely spiked Simon's shot.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea that shooting is more of a staying on a shooter is more of a long-term reputational thing rather than, oh, this guy made 1 3 in this game.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was just, I really, now Avdia is a better shooter than Camara, and, there wasn't much time. I don't know if there was time to like throw a pass to Avdia, even if it had been him, but like Zion just, the moment the ball was inbounded, he just like started moving towards the lane. Also going for, I mean, they were at home, but going for a 2 to tie rather than a 3.
Well, especially when you're the less talented team, even if Portland had been in the lead most of the game.
I'm sure, I mean, this is a really entertaining game in part because it was like some guys that I have long really liked as prospects, like really broke out. So the next guy that really mattered was Jordan Hawkins, who put up his uniform number, 24 points in the second half alone. He had 0 points in the first half and 24 in the second half. And I was just incredibly encouraged by what I saw from him offensively. And his line was great. Yeah,
I mean, 8. So he was 4 of 7 on threes, and then was 4 of 5 on twos. Didn't have any assists, but also didn't have any turnovers. 5 rebounds, and he at times can be an intriguing rebounder.
Yes, and because he actually just gets off the floor. I mean, that's one of the biggest things about him is for this type of player, how quickly he gets off the floor and the rise that he gets on his jumper. We didn't see him get to the basket all that much, but we started to see how powerful the combination of he and Zion could be. And a lot of what you see is Zion at the top, and then, one pass away, the guy, like they just have to get a guy at the elbow or Zion's just going to go right through whoever's guarding him in a lot of circumstances. And so just having Zion be able to throw it to Jordan Hawkins, his incredibly quick release and rise to fire. I mean, that's why Trey Murphy is such a good fit with Zion too. Hawkins also looking a little more comfortable shooting deep threes. I mean, he's not quite shooting where Murphy is. Like he still shoots a jumper, but he was looking more comfortable just stepping into spot ups. And then the most powerful thing is, well, Zion being able to like hand off to Hawkins and get him on the move. That was really exciting. And then they also were able to start running these really cool shooting sets. They ran one for Ingram, they ran one for Hawkins. They took advantage of DeAndre Ayton hanging out really close to the rim, which, I mean, that's obviously was the scheme. So this is what they're doing. I'll try to describe it to you guys. They would give Zion the ball at the right elbow. Big problem, Zion the ball at the right elbow, right? Like you got to load everyone up. DeAndre Ayton is not guarding him. They put Camara on him. I thought actually Ayton did a pretty decent job on Zion in the first half, and then Zion started beating him up in the second half in some isolation. So they went away from that. They tried to go more of the, we'll have Ayton be in help, guarding like a Daniel Tice or an Yves Missi, another guy who had a really good game in this one, that you really liked a lot, and I'm starting to like him a lot. So they put Zion at the right elbow. Big problem there, right? He's one rip through, one dribble away from the rim. That's going to hold the center in help position. And so they would start by running, some of those old kind of Steve Kerr like shooting sets, like think of it almost in the post. And then there would be a screen for Jordan Hawkins, who entered the ball to the elbow, to go to the weak side along the 3-point line. So he's getting like a little back screen there. Okay, great. Maybe you're able to get through that, right? But you're now behind him. So then what they do is they basically like create almost like a blind pig action out of that initial flare screen where the guy is where Hawkins is moving along the 3-point line. Imagine that he's moving away from the ball. His man is trailing him. Now you throw it to the opposite elbow where the center runs up to the opposite elbow. And remember, Ayton can't follow him because if he does that, then Zion's just going to go. There'll be no help on Zion. He'll just go right to the basket. And so then the guy who has received the ball at the left elbow now has a great passing angle to hand off to Hawkins and set another screen for him. And Hawkins either can shoot a 3 or a very nice little mid-range jumper, which they also ran that same play for Ingram as well.
That's an impressive set.
And, yeah, you know, it is really, I mean, I hopefully I described it well enough for people. I consider myself good at describing things. We'll see whether this is useful.
But as I was kind of piecing that through in my head, I want to give credit to Willie Green and his coaching staff that like it understands the strengths and weaknesses of his team really well, like understanding where Zion creates the most stress on the defense and how can you use that to generate looks for the guys who can take them in the right places.
Yeah, and James Borrego improbably is back in New Orleans this year. It seemed like he was going to get a head job. He was a perpetual bridesmaid in that, apparently. And so I know he's been given a lot of credit for their offense. Also, another thing they've been doing a lot of is setting a back screen for Brandon Ingram, especially like they'll have him be the inbounder on a sideline out of bounds, set a back screen for him, and then he'll try to go get right to the charge circle against a smaller player, which I think is actually great to like encourage him to play physically and like actually try to use his length and size against smaller players. So that's a set they've had a lot of success with, particularly in the first game against the Bulls, where Zach LaVine would get caught in that a lot of times and Brandon Ingram just went right through him. So if you have a guard defender that's not that physical, they're setting that for Ingram. Let's see what else. So Hawkins was great. Yeah, Yves Missi. I mean, there wasn't anything that was like crazy that he did, but I thought he just showed the ability to block some shots and run the floor and finish inside a little bit. So he gave him like reasonable minutes. You know, it wasn't like a dominating performance by him necessarily, but I mean, they're playing a center just about all the time. They did in fact close with Zion at center, which was interesting. Although I think they had a center in on that final possession. And then Daniel Tice too. I mean, he's plus 14. He had 4 fouls in 18 minutes, but he had 4 assists. And he from his days in Boston just knows how to play, even if it's not necessarily that he's even going to like, you know, hit a corner 3, which he can if he's wide open, but he just has a good understanding of like how to deal with not being guarded, whether it's doing those little Gortat screens that they used to love to do in Boston under Brad Stevens, or just catching the ball and when he's not being guarded and flipping right into a handoff to get a shooter open. Like he just knows how to, like, he's a little more mobile than your average mediocre shooting center. So he just has an understanding of like how to play, which I think is important. Let's see, what else was interesting from this game? Yeah, Herb Jones actually only played 29 minutes. Like they were really happy with Javonte Green at times. He was plus 6. Now, is it encouraging that they've got Javonte Green and Yves Missi together on the second unit right now? No, that's not a great shooting group. I would also say Donovan Clingan made a big impact, only played 14 minutes, and his offense is definitely still a work in progress, but he did have 4 block shots. Like you definitely felt him. He can't guard Zion speed-wise, but he did cause problems for Zion when he was off the ball, or really anyone. Ayton, just 5 of 14, 0 for 1 from the foul line. Doesn't get there very often. I guess he was out of practice. 4 fouls, 10 points. He is someone that he used to be really athletic. Like that was the big selling point for him. I'm not sure how hard he works on his body. And he's had a few injuries too. But you don't like, he's not really like that much of an alley-oop threat anymore. He missed a dunk coming down the lane.
I mean, didn't he also have a PED suspension? Am I remembering that correctly?
You are remembering that correctly, yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. So he has not looked, and I didn't think he just, and playing with force has always been a big problem for him. And he's got a pretty high skill level. Didn't take any threes after he took a couple in the first game. And didn't have his normal touch from mid range. I don't think that's going away. But
a little point on Ayton. I was thinking about this as I watched the Blazers a couple days ago. I see a parallel between Ayton and John Collins, where it's like the pretty good version of the guys that their best versions were, just isn't that valuable an NBA player. Whereas somebody who's a little bit more extreme, better in some way, is just bet. I mean, and Klingon's going to be this player in a matter of months, maybe a year. You're like, he's not bad defensively, but he's not good enough to hang your hat on that. And then he's like not good enough offensively. This is actually, in some ways, it's like what modern Vucevic is too, where you kind of like, if they were a little bit better at something, then it would force the defense. But like Ayton doesn't stress you out. And so at that point, you become just a dude, and then the contract starts to loom and everything else.
Andre Drummond is another example of these guys who were really good kind of early in their career as a big, and then just weren't able to be as effective, in part, I think, because they don't take great care of their bodies. And they were guys who were really drafted for their physical characteristics. And Ayton is, of course, more skilled than Drummond. Let's see.
He also plays a shitload less hard than Drummond does.
True. So Jeremy Grant played 40 minutes, 34 points, 8 of 17 from 3. And this was really the Pels scheme at work. And they've had to maybe lean into this even more now since they're smaller on the perimeter. But the problem is when you have Ingram, who's just not the fastest guy closing out there, like Herb Jones is really your only like long active defender that's available for the Pels right now. And so a big part of that whole scheme was, all right, yeah, we're going to give a lot of nail help, or we're going to overload to one side, but we got Herb Jones on the backside, or we got Herb Jones or Trey Murphy or Najee Marshall or Dyson Daniels at the elbow giving nail help, and then he can still get out to that shot in the perimeter and bother it. Jeremy Grant got up 17 threes in part because they felt like they just had to plug the nail, and then you would just throw one pass to Jeremy Grant. He's a pretty tall guy, and he would just shoot over whoever it was. And he was on fire early on in this one, cooled off late, but particularly in the first half when Portland went up by, I think they went up by as much as 20 at one point. Other problem for New Orleans was they scored 37 points in the first half.
Sure.
So
that's a problem.
But that was just an example of like, maybe this house of cards for New Orleans in terms of their defense is just not going to have enough pieces. Zion playing harder definitely helps. And they did have some pretty decent rim protection in this game, but also this is not a great spacing team. But for them to be giving up shots to like the one guy that you can't give up shots to as a spot up player for Portland was a little bit concerning to me.
It's going to be, I mean, you and I are going to see them play the Warriors twice in person this week. That scheme against the Warriors will be something we keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I haven't watched any of those first two Warriors games very closely, just because I knew I was going to see 3 of them this week. But obviously, they are off to one of the best starts that we've seen. I think they're actually the first team ever to win their first 2 games by 35 points. Yes, against Portland and Utah, who are both looking pretty bad. But also, that's still on the road. It's still at the start of the season when teams are playing hard. Where do you want to go next here?
Let's talk Grizzlies, because you and I each watched Memphis over the weekend, but we watched different games, which is sometimes pretty fun. I watched the Grizzlies-Rockets game, which ended up being, there was a huge swing. They were up, but up a little bit early on. And then Houston goes on this 16-0 run in the third quarter and pretty much just knock it out from there. And so we'll talk briefly. I'll talk a little bit about Houston first, and then we'll get into Memphis, and you can bridge the gap because you watched Memphis Orlando, which Memphis won on Saturday. And so for the Rockets, we talked a little bit with their opening game about, because you watched that against Charlotte, about how they have all these duplicative forwards and how that sort of didn't work against Charlotte. It worked against Memphis because especially with their guys out, Memphis doesn't have many forwards at all. And so I thought that there were times where Amen Thompson's athleticism or Whitmore or Tari Eason, who was just wrecking things on defense. The Rockets had 10 steals as a part of their 17. And they were just getting Memphis kind of off rhythm and all that. And so having that kind of length, and of course they still have Jabari and Dylan Brooks, and Şengün, I thought, did a pretty good job defensively in the second half. So I thought that made a big difference, was they were able to do that. And Houston made their threes at a reasonable rate, especially in the second half. This wasn't as superlative a Jalen Green game as he had some really nice stretches against the Hornets, but I thought he played well overall. Took a couple of forced shots, but played within himself. The other thing that struck me about the starting five for Houston was that Fred VanVleet got up the fewest shots and had the fewest free throw attempts. He tied for the free throw attempt one, but he had the fewest shot attempts. Everyone else was in double digits. He had 9. And I thought VanVleet did fine. They were all threes. He made most of them. Like that part, it's not like it was bad. And the offense was flowing through him a lot. Also, sometimes, of course, Şengün and Jalen Green. But for Houston, it showed a part of what they can do. And yeah, it helped that they outshot their opponents from 3. But the length that they had did well. It forced Memphis's lesser lights to kind of take tougher shots. Like, for example, second round pick Jalen Wells, he was 3 of 14. Some of that wasn't garbage time, of course, to be abundantly clear. But like they were getting Memphis to take shots by the guys who didn't necessarily want to. And that's something that you can do with good positional size.
Yeah, Memphis's formula, and of course they missed Jaren Jackson Jr. to start the season, and then he actually played on the second night of the back-to-back. Grizz, by the way, are starting the season off with 6 games and 9 nights, and that, I think, informs some of their minutes distribution. I mean, again, this game wasn't close down the end because it was a 39-18 third quarter for Houston. Grizz actually, had a 6-point lead at halftime and then just got blown out of the building in the third. But Ja, I mean, this continues to be a big takeaway that Ja looks like Ja, and if he's on not playing that many minutes, he is getting it in these minutes that he is playing. So he had 24 points in this one. I mean, the usage was off the charts. He also had 6 turnovers. I think Houston matches up pretty well against Memphis because they're not necessarily going to get overwhelmed by that Memphis pace. And that looks a lot better too when Jaren is playing in terms of just their overall athleticism. But, it's pretty remarkable that the Grizz are, they're playing like 10 guys. And really even 11, because like they've got 5 bigs now that they're playing with Jaren back, as we'll talk about. Because they still are trying to get Brandon Clark into the mix. But Houston also has a really deep bench, and so like that Grizz bench has been effective against Utah and very effective against Orlando. But I think Houston really hurt them.
Yeah,
and
part of how Houston uses that bench is that they play pretty fast when they can. Especially if they can get a turnover. But they did okay off of 5 rebounds, and so like only 70% of their offensive possessions started in the half court. That's exactly what you want to look for a team that their half court offense can be good, but it's not always good, and especially if the other team executes. I also thought it wasn't surprising, but it was worth keeping an eye on that the Grizzlies made Zach AD was the focal point early, so he starts games as you often do with your Moon centers, though not the Blazers with Klingon. He had a lot of touches early, and then when the Grizzlies were on defense, Şengün was challenging him either by making him defend in space or defend movement. So there are plays where Şengün's like doing a handoff and then going towards the basket or something like that. And I thought Edey did reasonably well. I mean, you are always aware of his limitations, and it's always going to be the question of like, can he do enough? And I mean, he had 13 points, 9 rebounds, 4 of which were offensive in 23 minutes. They were outscored by 11 points in those 23 minutes. But it's like, Edey's part in the Grizzlies equation is going to be worth watching, and I'm really interested in how that factored in the Orlando game because Jaren played.
Yeah, so they did start Edey. I guess actually a couple more notes in this. Houston just destroyed Memphis on the offensive glass.
Oof.
Jabari Smith Jr.
I should have mentioned it. I forgot to.
Yeah, 23 offensive rebounds. Jabari Smith Jr. had 6 himself. I would be shocked if that weren't a career high. He also had 4 assists.
By the way, Nate,
blocks.
48% offensive rebound rate for the Rockets in this one.
Yeah, that's a pretty insane number. Like you said, Edie played 23 minutes, but I don't think he's going to be a great defensive rebounder. Offensive rebounding, I think could be more interesting for him. I still want to see this goes to the Orlando game too, which we'll switch to, but I think that Edie still needs to just like get deeper post position a lot. Like I'd like his hook shots. Like I think that could be interesting maybe later in his career, but they have a lot of other mouths to feed. So yeah, and also worth noting too, both teams took 36 free throws in this game, although neither hit even 70%. Yeah, I mean, on Ja, 24 points, 17 field goal attempts, 9 free throw attempts, and 6 turnovers in 24 minutes. That is a gargantuan usage, to be sure. So yeah, let's get to this Orlando game. And this game led me to tweet that I think the Grizz are back. And they just, the second night of a back-to-back for both teams, Orlando had played against Brooklyn the previous night, and Memphis was coming home from Houston. But Memphis just absolutely physically overwhelmed the Magic, particularly in transition. I mean, I haven't looked at it yet. Maybe you can look it up while I'm talking. The transition numbers for Memphis from this game. I only watched the first half because they were up by 25 at halftime. They scored 69 points in the first half, 35-19 second quarter. But particularly with Ja, again, he only played 25 minutes. And one problem is he hasn't been able to make a jumper yet. But he was just a monster. Like when he got the ball and he was pushing it, I mean, there's just nothing that Orlando could do. And like Jalen Suggs would try to pressure him and Ja would just blow by him in the backcourt. Just like absolutely nothing that he could do. And then mostly it was Ja's distribution. And some of the passes that he threw for alley-oops, one of them was Jay Huff had one of the dunks of the year. Coming out of the right corner, Ja drives, finds Huff. There are two bigs there for Orlando. And Huff, the pass is a little bit behind him, so Huff catches it and then just jumps backwards and dunks it over his head on two guys. It was awesome.
That's awesome.
And this is another one where I was able to think like, obviously every one of these kind of two-way sort of players that I like or guys who are doing something at the end of the season, like they're not going to hit, right? You're just saying, oh, I think this guy might actually have a decent chance. And that really has proved to be true about both Huff, who I never understood why he couldn't get a chance because of his skill set as a shooter and shot blocker. And like he definitely has been a solid shot blocker before. And he even moves his feet a little bit better than expected. He's got some athleticism to finish at the basket. And he, as John would say, he's a smart guy because he went to University of Virginia. And then, so like he's fitting right in. Like he's been better than Brandon Clark early. Like Brandon Clark is now really their fifth big. And then Santi Aldama has also been fantastic for Memphis going forward. That's not necessarily the guy I was talking about as far as another lower level guy. He was a first round draft pick, although an unexpected one. But Aldama, he's turning into a real shooter now. He was 4 of 6 from 3 in this one, another 22 points. I think he had 5 threes in the first half against Utah as well. So he's like a guy you really need to guard out there. He also had 5 assists. And then Scottie Pippen Jr. too. I said that to John, when I was seeing him at the end of last year, and probably you too, that I thought he would be like a very solid backup point guard. And I actually think he could be a starter someday. And like if I were him, knowing what my role was going to be, I would have, rather than taken the 3-4 year deal at the minimum with a bunch of non-guarantees, I can't remember exactly what the structure was, I would have just played this year out and forced them to pay me more money because he was fantastic in this one. Other than his turnovers, that's the one thing he'll do is he'll like can get trapped under the basket sometimes. Like Jalen Suggs kind of had him timed out on some of these looping passes back out front of the basket. But he had 11 points, hit his only 3 when he was wide open, 12 assists, and like defensively, he's not Jalen Suggs. He doesn't have that type of physical characteristics, but he kind of reminds me of him a little bit. I mean, he really just gets into the ball, really good help defender, really good hands. If he gets stuck against someone bigger, like he can really guard him well. Like he got stuck in the post against Paolo and actually like moved his feet really well, stayed in front of him, like didn't get knocked over, although he did have a little bit of help behind him. So like the Grizz improbably, even with all the guys out that they have, like even like Jake LaRavia even was like so ineffective in this game.
Mm-hmm.
Like Wells had a rough one in that game that you watched, the Houston game, but like he's been coming in and at least like giving them semi-competent play with Luke Kennard out. Huff had 18 points. Like they actually improbably have like 11 guys that they're playing, and it's working, even though they're just like, Marcus Smart's playing 21 minutes and Jackson coming back from the hamstring is 23. Like Edie again was in foul trouble early, so he only played 13. But like they just ran the Orlando Magic off the floor with their transition play. It was very impressive.
And then for the Magic, the thing that stuck out to me on the box score is that 3 of their 5 starters shot 25% from the field or worse. That's not necessarily the greatest way to do it offensively. And when you look at Orlando overall in the game, they put up a offensive rating under 100, 98.9, and their half court offensive rating was an 80.
Yeah, Paolo ended up 4 of 12, 7 of 13 from the foul line. He was the one guy that I thought was effective getting to the basket for them, although I didn't watch the second half. But he was the only guy who seemed like he was bringing it offensively in the first. Franz, one good thing for him is that he has shot 40% or better, I think, from 3 in every game so far, and he was 4 of 10 in this one. Wendell Carter Jr. was awful. Really just did absolutely nothing protecting the basket at all. The Grizz were assaulting the paint when he was in. He had a number of plays where he was sort of just like out in no man's land, not even really guarding a shooter, and then the Grizz would just go right to the basket and he just wouldn't be in position. Contavious Caldwell-Pope, you would hope that this would be like some great defensive backcourt with him and Suggs, and Caldwell-Pope is just not shooting well early in the season. We'll see whether that improves or not. And yeah, it was interesting. Cole Anthony only got 8 minutes. Anthony Black is very much ahead of him in the rotation right now. And I thought Black only took 1 3 and passed up a number of them. That wasn't amazing, but he was finishing at the rim pretty well. Like he's another one of these guys who's skinny. I think he's kind of filled out. He had some really nice, like kind of not quite floater finishes, but just like shots where he got into a guy's body and then was able to loft it over them at the rim off the backboard with contact. So that was solid to see. And Gary Harris only played 4 minutes. He had a really nice opener. They went to Jet Howard, but this was a blowout really the whole second half. So,
well, and something that stuck out to me, so in the first half, which we'll call the competitive portion of the game, the guys who came off the bench, Black played the most, then Cole Anthony, then Mo Wagner, then Cole Anthony, then Gary Harris, then Jet Howard and Goga Batadze played a little bit.
A couple other small notes from this one. The Grizz half-court offense, Orlando wasn't providing a ton of resistance in this one, but of course, the Grizz brought in. Let me look up the guy's name so it's sure it's Thomas. No, this is great for live YouTube. Thomas Lisalo is the guy's name. He was the coach in Paris and had one of the best offenses in European history last year. But they ran some interesting stuff. They had one set play where they actually set up, they disguised it well, the old Mike D'Antoni elbow get, where you run a pick and roll at the free throw line and slip the guy out of there to get an alley-oop, except the roll man for the alley-oop was Ja Morant with a big, I think it might have been Aldamas throwing the pass. That was awesome. The Grizz, like their sub patterns are crazy. Like at one point in the first half, they have Jalen Wells, Jake LaRavia, Jay Huff, Santi Aldama, and Scottie Pippen Jr. And like that unit was playing well together. Like it's very impressive if you just look at the minute totals and who's been playing.
And when your second unit is 40% South Bay Lakers.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I think the Lakers might have had both Huff and Scottie Pippen Jr. at the same time.
I believe they did.
And now, I mean, the big thing with Pippen is that he just suddenly learned how to shoot last year. I don't know what happened there. I think he just was not a very good shooter, and that is a big. He still, I think, would be an NBA player even without the shooting, but not necessarily like a solid backup. And then Jay Huff is better than any big on the Lakers right now, I would say. We'll see whether this continues, but we'll wait till Christian Wood gets back. The Grizz are also doing, they're a very analytically inclined team. This doesn't surprise me. They're doing the shoot at 14 at the end of the shot clock thing that Caitlin Cooper highlighted very well, that the Pacers do, where basically the idea is, if you are going to give the other team another shot anyway, like, so let's say you've got 10 on the shot clock and there's 17 seconds left in the period or something like that, or 20 seconds left in the period. You want to shoot at 14 because then you can send everyone to the offensive glass, because if the other team gets the rebound, they're not going to fast break. They're going to try to get the last shot of the period. So you're not concerned about giving up a fast break. And then if you get the offensive rebound, then you can hold it for the last shot if you want to also. So it makes a ton of sense to do it that way at the end of the quarter, because there's no opportunity cost to just crashing the shit out of the offensive boards. And then you also can get the last shot of the quarter. Yeah, all right. I think that's all I got on this one. What's our next destination here?
Let's go to Madison.
Well, here, let's see. Do we have any good comments here? Yeah, let's see.
Take a look.
Memphis hasn't even unlocked Yuki yet. Yeah, that's true. Memphis consistently bets on guys who the rest of the league may discount based on certain traits. I'm trying to think of who. I mean, Edie, I guess, would be an example of that. Gigi Jackson, because of some of the stuff that he dealt with in college from just off the court things.
We can do this one reasonably quickly from Corey. How does renegotiate and extend work? For example, if Portland wanted to extend Denny Avdija before his contract is over, could they do it? They can, but you have to be eligible for all of those components, and you have to have cap space at that moment. So like the Jazz did with Lauri Markkanen this year. So you can't be like, oh, well, we'll have cap space in 3 years, and so we can do this. No, you have to have it at that moment, start it at that moment, and everything works from there.
Yeah, I should note, Dirty Dancer pointed this out, that Orlando, Jonathan Isaac didn't play. Has he played at all? Was he just not playing because
he played in the Heat game?
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, so that's probably part of why they just couldn't match athletically. I thought actually Jaren Jackson looked good in this game too. I should have mentioned that, coming back from the hamstring, that he was able to do some of the stuff that quote unquote worked last year, where he was just powering in a position and like they weren't going to double team. And I will take it back. It was not Morant who threw the pass for that ridiculous J Huff reverse. It was actually Jaren Jackson Jr. who threw it on a drive. The guy with the lowest.
Jaren Jackson threw it on a drive?
Yeah.
To someone else? Yeah. Not to the rim?
Let's see here. If we got any other. The draft has been as advertised. I'm guessing Basketball Genesis is talking about the 2024 draft. We haven't really had any rookies who have popped yet. Gio asks, what's real, Nuggets 0-2 or Lakers 3-0? I didn't watch that Clippers Nuggets game because I'd already seen a full game of both those teams, but obviously a disturbing result for the Nuggets offense to just get.
We'll talk about the Lakers a little bit later. I think it's the Lakers of those two.
Okay.
I got asked in my Discord on Friday about like what things I felt more confident in after one game, and one of them was my Lakers over.
Yeah, that's always fun. That's why I love this time of year. It's like, okay, what are your priors? What are we seeing? Like, how do you reconcile those two? It's really fun. I mean, should we go there now? Let's go.
We can do that. So, I will admit I didn't watch this whole one. The Suns were up 22 in the first half. Lakers came back, and it was more nip and tuck by the fourth quarter, which is when I really got into it. And I think the place I want to start is kind of a broader thread with the Lakers, who after they beat the Suns also beat the Kings, and so now the Lakers are 3-0, and so for me, if Anthony Davis is going to be not only this productive offensively, but still be a very good defensive player, well, then that really changes the conversation around the Lakers overall, because something we talked about a lot, and why like you and I were both torn on the Lakers over under, is just the idea that AD and LeBron stayed reasonably healthy last year, and the whole team wasn't quite good enough. And to me, Davis has been a little bit more energized, and like he played in the Olympics. You might not have thought that was going to be the case, but he's looked great to start the year.
Yeah, and part of it has been that they've just been giving him the ball more. They try to, even if the play isn't like technically for him, to just run more stuff through him. And particularly because they don't have, a dominating just line up the pins and knock him down, pick and roll threat. I think that's really good. LeBron hasn't been doing nearly as much on the ball, though he had a big game against the Kings, mostly just shooting the jump shot, mostly even just shooting spot up jump shots yesterday. We can talk more about what we've seen from him, but that's it. Just letting Anthony Davis have the ball more, make more decisions. Like there certainly were times when he would get lost. And also like this is, I think, an important reason to give him the ball more. I think like there've been times they've done that, right? But it's more been through like the post up or isolation play as opposed to just like flowing things through him on the perimeter. But we've talked about David Locke highlighted this back when he was with New Orleans, that Davis is one of the most offensively inconsistent superstars that we've ever seen. You've noted, and I think cogently, that that's because he's more of a dependent player. So if you're running pick and roll, like how is the defense playing him? If they're going to really load to him, then he may not have a great night. But now because they're running more through him in the handoff, or even letting him reject some of those handoffs, go for the QB keeper, get to the bucket. Like the fact that they are making him get a touch and be involved doing something on every possession should help him be more consistent. And that's why he's had over 30 points in each of the first 3 games. Yeah. So, I mean, just the overall Lakers offense is good. What did you have from the Phoenix game?
So I thought that the kind of a little bit bridging kind of the earlier and later was that the Lakers also, they've done a nice job getting out in transition opportunistically. And you're going to have those opportunities against Phoenix because the Suns are still turning it over. Now, Tyus Jones and Monte Morris combined for 2 turnovers in this game, but the Suns still had 16. That is a turnover rate of 17%. That's below average, all that type of stuff. And I thought Austin Reeves played well. He had a good overall game, but I thought he had some nice moments in the later going. And they needed that in part because it was a really kind of shaky game from D'Angelo Russell. He only got up 6 shots, but there were a couple, there was this bizarre play late in the game. I almost couldn't believe it. I think it was mid-4th where Russell gets the ball a little bit of a break, kind of like right at the break for the 3-pointer. And he just, no hesitation. I think he could have taken that shot, no problem. He, no hesitation, passes it to Jackson Hayes in the corner, who's just like, what in the world are you doing? And then Jackson Hayes immediately passed it to Russell, and I think he took a worse shot there. And it's just like, you're a point guard. Like, you should be aware of down and distance here. You should understand that the guy who you're passing it to isn't there, and that even if you're not making your shots in this game, you're still a good shooter. And D'Angelo Russell usually doesn't have crises of confidence. I don't know exactly what it was, but that was super bizarre.
Yeah, so Phoenix, I mean, they went crazy from the 3-point line in the first quarter, putting up 38 points, and then the Lakers just methodically worked their way back into it and won comfortably in the end. Phoenix then, on the second night of a back-to-back for them, and their home opener, not the second night of a back-to-back for Dallas, throttled Dallas pretty badly at home. So that they're still 2-1. I didn't watch the Saturday game, didn't love how they looked in the Clippers game, as we talked about pretty extensively on Wednesday. But did you have any Phoenix takeaways from watching the end of this one?
They still have to figure out the balance of their offense with Durant, Beal, and Booker. But they are all good basketball players, and very few teams can defend all 3 of them. The other question for Budenholzer that I'm just going to really keep an eye on over the course of the year is just like, I think there are times that Jusuf Nurkic is one of their better players. They should just play him more. And that doesn't mean he has to close, because closing, other teams go to other lineups and everything like that. But Nurkic, there were points in the 4th quarter where I'm like, okay, this has come up before with the Warriors and Looney, where it's like, yeah, I can understand why he might not close, because you want to go a little bit more scheme versatile. You want to do some other stuff. But if you're not going to close with this guy, have him in before that. and have him
Yeah.
in, in the middle of the fourth or in the early fourth, and have it play out because like Yusuf Nurkic, he's a big guy. He can, he turned the ball over a couple times in this one, but like he gives them something that the other guys don't. And there are circumstances where like there are teams where it's like, oh no, you should just go small because your bigs aren't good or your smalls are good. The Suns are not that team. The Suns do not have enough depth. I mean, they're playing Royce O'Neal, they're playing Ryan Dunn, and then it's like Iguodala and Plumlee. So no, if Nurkic is playing 18 minutes, Plumlee's playing 19, and Iguodala is playing 6, shift that closer to Nurkic. There may have been an injury or something. I didn't see it. I apologize if there was, but I was just like,
yeah. Well, I mean, he was 1 of 5 with 4 turnovers, and I don't know if he's a great matchup against AD. He might just be too under athletic to deal with him, but I don't know that Plumlee is any better
right
in that regard. But Plumlee actually was plus 14 and Nurkic was negative 19, so I think that's where.
But I think some of that was that Plumlee was in when some of the 3 barrage happened. I think the Plumlee was in for some of that, and it's like, oh look, he's on the floor for this part when other guys are making shots. Like, congratulations.
Well, and I will also say that Ryan Dunn, who we were like, all right, is he going to not really play that much from the Clippers game? He was 3 of 5 from 3 in 13 minutes, so that he's continuing. I mean, 5 shots in 13 minutes is really good. So he's continuing that increase that he showed during the preseason. And we'll see. That's the other thing about these guys. Like, oh man, this guy's just like such an unbelievable college defender. Like he's going to be amazing in the pros as well. We'll see on that. That actually takes time. I actually think that who is going to be an unbelievable defensive perimeter player is one of the harder things to scout, because there are a lot of guys who just turn into having that have to be their thing in the NBA, and that can actually be some of the best defensive players. So like, Herb Jones was supposed to be an unbelievable defender, and he has been. Although I haven't loved his starts this season, relative to his usual levels. I thought he wasn't that great in the Blazer game. But were there other guys who are like, Davion Mitchell was supposed to be like the greatest perimeter defender that anyone had ever seen. Like he's just been a guy, like he hasn't made a difference in that way. So
well,
Jalen Suggs was supposed to be pretty good, and he's been unbelievable, right?
Well, and the greater history is like these guys that did a lot more in college, like a Marcus Smart or a Tony Allen, who then scale down their role on offense and become these defensive monsters. Yeah. I mean, even Iguodala, you could argue late career Iguodala was an example of that too, though he had a much larger role on the Nuggets and the Sixers earlier in his career.
Yeah, or like Jonathan Isaac is another one, right? Like who saw Jonathan Isaac basically being like, this amazing like shot blocking power forward when he was drafted. Like he was like kind of this skinny wing. You just weren't really sure. A lot of people thought Brandon Ingram was going to be a really good defender, and that he's a little bit sleepier of a guy. Hasn't necessarily been the case. So I mean, I think Dunn certainly has that potential, but I want to see whether he really makes the difference there. Because there have been a lot of guys who've been advertised as like these unbelievable guys. It's like, all right, let's actually see what you look like against the best players. I mean, the NBA is just so hard to defend. Yeah, and then the game against the Kings, Lakers finally beat the Kings for the first time in like a year and a half. Thank God. Anthony Davis finally somehow beat Domantas Sabonis. Although I do think there is something to the whole Sabonis-Davis thing. And Sabonis had a really good game. Like I think there is a level of physicality that Sabonis brings that there are not that many people who just like really try to like punk AD physically. And I don't know if the guy's really like that much stronger than him, like how well AD responds to that. Like Sabonis had a ridiculous dunk on Davis in transition in that game. But LeBron came back. I think he was 6 of 6 in the fourth, had like some number of points and rebounds that like no one had ever done on 6 of 6 and 15 points. He also had an absolutely hilarious chewing out of Rui Hachimura.
Oh my God.
Did you see that?
Yeah, I did.
So it just got caught on the broadcast, like right as they were going to commercial. LeBron's in the middle of this really hot stretch, and they throw it to Rui on the wing. He's like not really open. LeBron is open at the top, and Rui looks him off and takes 2 dribbles in, and then takes a contested fadeaway over 2 dudes. And they get to the sideline, and LeBron's like, I've made 10 in a row. I think that was hyperbole. It's like, I've made 10 in a row, and you're going to take a contested off the dribble mid-range, like swing, motherfucker.
It was incredible. That was very big on Reddit today or last night today. So like,
yes.
of course, it's like catnip.
But now I do think like LeBron to me has not looked great in terms of his finishing around the basket. He did say that he is kind of picking his spots more this year, which I understand. But even when he was going well, like he got this back door being guarded by De'Aaron Fox, like Kevin Huerter was coming over, and he still like had to like pump fake, like wasn't really comfortable going up. I mean, we see this more every year that as good as he is athletically, like he will have kind of more of these blown tire finishes around the rim. I think he's also exerting more on defense this year early on because the perimeter guys are working, and Austin Reeves has been a big part of that. I think he's looked great early on, and particularly in the Suns game, he's been kind of playing more on the ball. That's something that Jovan Buha said they were going to do this year with Russell playing more off the ball. And so like he just is playing very free. He is upping the 3-point volume, taking more kind of bad shots. Like that was one of my biggest problems when he didn't shoot enough threes, even though he would make the open ones. And I think like his passing has been really good. Like he's sort of brought back that flair that like made Lakers fans fall in love with him so much, and is just JJ Redick said after the game, he's like, he didn't realize how good Austin Reeves was. And so like, if he can take this step forward, then all that I was saying about how they like this fact that he's the sacred cow and they shouldn't trade him, I'll end up being wrong about that. But that I think has been another one of the big things to really like about the Lakers early on is they haven't even had to go on the road yet. We'll see how they play, but and then Gabe Vincent is just like he still is just doing absolutely nothing on offense so far. Like that's a little bit of a concern. Let's see. All right, let's hit a couple more questions here. We got Coach of the Year top 3 so far. Stop it, Sims. All right,
too early.
I'll try to give you something here. Let me see if look at the standings and see if anyone really jumps out to me so far.
I mean, Memphis getting this from their bench is really impressive.
Yeah. Taylor Jenkins would be up there. I mean, Steve Kerr would have to be up there too. If Golden State is going to look like this, but probably for me it would be Joe Mazzulla. I mean, Boston is also killing people. They actually, we could talk about this briefly. Their game against Detroit last night. Detroit's been pretty competitive, I would say. Cade had a good game against Cleveland on Friday until they started trapping him, and then they couldn't really do much with that. And then Pistons are actually up 6 with 5 minutes remaining, and then they scored 2 points in the competitive remaining portion of the game. And Drew Holiday had done absolutely nothing. He makes like 2 huge defensive plays, stripping guys, Jaden Ivey in transition, and then I think he stripped the next guy, Tobias Harris, who also got the ball in transition, hit a couple of spot-up threes. Derek White blocked a Cade Cunningham dunk after Cade like slipped out of a screen and was released to the rim. So these guards made like all these amazing defensive plays. Detroit doesn't score other than like a little like look what I found offensive rebound for Jaden Ivey. They didn't score for 5 minutes. So that's one of those things you like to see for a Boston team that is on the road, just to be able to like, all right, we're going to put the hammer down in the last 5 minutes and win this game. So they're 3-0. Kenny Atkinson, Cleveland's looking very good. They haven't played anyone yet. Daigneault, OKC has blown out both of their teams that they've played on the road despite some injury issues. So I mean, those 4 teams have probably been the ones that have been most impressive, and then I might throw Memphis in there too early, and then JJ Redick too. I mean, if the Lakers are win 55 games, like it could be him. So Coach of the Year is really hard to figure out, but there have been, I think, some coaches that I'm been impressed by so far.
The next game I want to discuss is the Pacers getting absolutely trucked at Madison Square Garden by the Knicks. And a portion of this is, okay, if a team shoots 3 of 30 from 3 and the other team is respectable there, it's going to make it look it's going to make it a lot harder for them. But that to me was not the story. I think it was the Knicks who had this brutal first game where they gave up tied for the NBA record from threes from Boston. I thought they looked a lot better offensively and defensively. And these two teams played in the playoffs, of course, but it looked dramatically different because in part, some of these guys were more healthy. That was a series that was defined, unfortunately, by injuries. And so for New York, part of it was like, we got to see more of the theory of the case of like, okay, their offense, looked a lot better. They had a 130 offensive rating during what Cleveland Glass called the competitive portion of the game. I think it was even higher during what I considered the competitive portion of the game, which is closer to the first half. And Brunson was great. He was clearly the best player on the floor. 26 points in 30 minutes, 10 to 19 from the field, had some really nice passes too. And they used the spacing of Towns, but also it was Indiana's backcourt scored a combined 2 points. Halliburton going 0 for 7 from 3, and he's talked about how he needs to shoot better. Yes, obviously he does. And he's not dramatically better defensively either. So when he's not shooting, it looks a lot worse. But I thought that we saw against the Celtics that the Bridges and Anunoby combo, that against the team that has like a lot of good offensive players, it can be a kind of a challenge because you can't put out all those fires. It works better against a team like the Pacers because I thought that Anunoby, when he was guarding his former teammate Pascal Siakam, did a really nice job, and that was a part of why Siakam, like, he still definitely had his moments, but he wasn't dominant in a way that he kind of needed to be for the Pacers to win when the Knicks were this good offensively. And then Halliburton, it was a team effort, but I thought they did a nice job on him. Halliburton had some nice passes, and so that was there. And then the other thing, it's interesting because he was credited with 3 blocks, but I had it in my notes early on, and I felt it again later on, was that as much as I've loved him for years, being a rim protector is a couple of different components. Shot blocking is one of them, but one of them is being a deterrent. And it just feels to me as I watch the Pacers this year, and remember, you and I both watched a portion of the Pistons game, Miles Turner is less of a deterrent now than I thought he was.
You don't feel him at all. I mean, like, he'll block a few shots. I don't think he's like a bad defensive center, but they need him to be like good.
They need him to be good, and he wasn't. And so that, like, when we're thinking about what the Pacers can be. So first of all, I mean, if Halliburton isn't making any shots, then their offense is going to be what they want it to be. But even if that gets closer to very good, even if it's not the elite, well, then they need their defense to be passable. And I'm a little less confident in that, even though they have other personnel. And then the other thing that was a really positive carryover from the Pistons game was we're still seeing Benedict Mathurin. I mean, I thought that he's showing confidence on his jump shot. He's getting downhill, and he's looking significantly, like, he's looking better defensively. We're not going to say like, oh, it's a totally new world for Benedict Mathurin, but he's looking more competent, to be sure. And so I don't know. I don't think that means, because like Nembhard still, like, what Nembhard did last year is still like, that holds the weight to me. But I'm thrilled that Benedict Mathurin is at least working his way into a conversation. I don't know if it's the conversation.
Yeah, but I mean, Halliburton just looks like shit so far. I mean, that's
it's
like
a huge problem.
I mean, that's like, if he's again, like, the upside case for the Pacers was that, and they have a deep team, they have a fair amount of talent, but the upside case for the Pacers was that he was going to play the way he played the first half of last year, and that certainly looks like it's not been the case so far. That, he hasn't. I mean, the biggest thing that he needed that went away for him, and Caitlin talked about this pretty well, was that, it's that left hamstring. He likes to shoot that step back 3 going to his right. I mean, if he's not going to be a 40% 3-point shooter on this crazy volume off the dribble, he's a good player. He might even be like a lower end all-star, but they need him to be like one of the best offensive forces in the game. And so if he's not going to be that, I mean, I think that's huge, not only for the Pacers this year, but maybe even in the long term, that like this group, you made this trade for Pascal Siakam based on in part on who you thought Tyrese Halliburton was. And then they're going to be, basically hilariously kind of the exact same team that they were back at like the end of the Victor Oladipo era. It's like sort of this like nice team. Maybe we'll get the 6th seed a couple of years. Maybe we'll get some injuries and win a playoff series, or even 2. But that's probably not going to happen again. But like, are these guys just going to be the 2021 Hawks? Like, is that what we're going to be talking about these guys as 3 years from now? Because if Tyrese Halliburton isn't going to be a monster anymore, like, that's what it is.
I hope that's not the case, but
I desperately hope
possible
to be wrong about that, because like that first 2 months of the season last year is like one of the most fun stretches that any player has ever had.
Yeah, I mean, the Pacers were the like, as Matt Moore put it last year, the two most fun teams in the NBA are the Pacers and whoever's playing the Pacers, and I'd love to get back there.
Yeah, and now they have, with nobody healed, with Siakam, like their defense is a little more competent, although certainly not in this game. And it was good to see the theory of the case for the Knicks offense just completely destroying people. And I think there is a school of thought that first game was more about the Celtics than the Knicks, but also the Knicks need to beat the Celtics. Like they didn't put this team together to like lose 4-0 to the Celtics in the playoffs, even if they are good against the rest of the league. They already were at that point. Couple of quick hitters here. Atlanta and Charlotte. LaMelo continued to look really good. How did he play last night? Did he even play last night? Didn't see that yet. But his first 2 games, he had over 30 points, was shooting it incredibly well.
Yeah, he did play. He was 27 points in 37 minutes, 9 of 22 from the field against the Heat.
Yeah, and he's also been getting the line. He took 8 free throw attempts against the Heat, and took 10 in the opener. However, this game, and there have been a lot of games like this. The Utah-Memphis game was unwatchable due to fouls. This Atlanta-Charlotte game was unwatchable due to fouls. The Philly-Toronto game, which I didn't watch too much of, but I'm sure it was unwatchable with like over 100 free throws being taken. And we heard all this stuff about, all right, the new rules this year, and they're going to carry that over, and straight line pathway benefits going to go to the defense there a little bit more. I hate the way the game is being refereed in this first week. It is awful, and it shows up in the numbers too. So the free throw rate of all of last season was about 19. And then after February 1st, around the time when those rules changes were made, it was 17.8. I loved it. I thought that the product was just much more aesthetically pleasing. And now it is back up. You want to guess what the free throw rate is?
I actually know what it is.
You just looked it up. Yeah. 22.8. Awful. Like that. There's a 5%, higher rate. I mean, that is, and a 20% increase almost in free throws.
And what frustrates me is it's not like offenses are playing differently. It's not like and
it's bullshit. Like these are bullshit calls that guys are being given, right? Like it's all like Trae Young bridge to nowhere foul at the end of the game. Oh, he's trying to dribble to the hash mark, and a guy's slightly moving his feet, and Trae slams into him for a foul. Like that, it's all these like these terrible calls on plays where like the defense isn't even getting an advantage, and yeah, it's killing me. There are just way too many fouls on the perimeter being called again, and it's just like I really just don't like it. Like it's not like, oh, these guys are driving to the basket and like they're just like getting fouls on the bigs at the rim. I mean, that's from watching it. We would have to break it down a little bit more to see exactly what kind of fouls there are, but yeah, I don't. I mean, have you noticed that?
I have, absolutely, and I've watched a few of the games that haven't been dragged down by it, but you do see the calls that way, and you worry about the incentives and like if this continues, that guys will go back to some of that stuff a little bit more. And I'm not gonna say no one benefits, because obviously there are people who benefit, but the watchability of the product is not one of the things that benefits. And as much as it is a athletic competition, a sport, and all that kind of stuff, like, you can make these decisions that make it a more enjoyable product. And I was so pleased for the NBA to do so. And the good news, the silver lining of this is that they can go back. Like and we've seen these adjustments even less extreme than what happened last year. So I don't think that it's going to be this way forever. I hope that people around the league who matter have seen what we've seen and feel similarly to us, and because they can actually make the change. They can push things that will make this what we want more likely.
Philly, not a huge surprise that they lost to the Bucks on opening night, other than the Bucks blew a game against Chicago. I actually did watch some of that. I can talk about that some. I didn't have that in our notes, but really Chicago, they shot it very well. Obviously, Kobe White went crazy. He had 35 points in 29 minutes and hit a bunch of threes. But what I thought was really lacking for the Bucks is what you would expect, like just their lack of athleticism and physicality. Like the Bulls really punked them. Like Patrick Williams, he's only had one half this way this season so far, but like he's like flying in for offensive rebounds. Like Euro bumping guys out of the way for dunks and transition. Like he was really like dominating them physically. They got a bunch of offensive rebounds on the Bucks. Bobby Portis, I thought, really struggled on defense. Giannis, as we've noted, just you don't feel him the same way defensively. That was certainly the case in this game. Dame is as bad as ever defensively. They were calling him up and really like going by him. I think he's looked pretty decent on offense, but this is one where the Bucks just didn't play nearly hard enough. I mean, the Bulls put up like 130 on them. So that you could just see it as they're trying to like, all right, it's time. We're the good team against the bad team. We sleptwalk through the first 3 quarters. We're gonna really put the hammer down. It's like, no, they just could never get back into contact in the game because the Bulls just like kept beating them in the effort categories. But then Philly is now 0-2. Tyrese Maxey's been really bad. He is, as the primary focus, he's really struggled to distribute, and his 3-pointer's been off. Maybe he's dealing with a thumb issue. But they lost to the Raptors 905 plus Scotty Barnes on, I think it was Saturday. And
it was, and they have a back-to-back. They played the Pacers on Sunday in a loser leaves town match.
Well, maybe they both leave town, actually. I'm not sure where they both play next. But I mean, the big problem for Philly is that you could see is they had absolutely no one to guard Scotty Barnes. And there aren't that many of like those types of power forwards in the Eastern Conference that are just going to like dominate you physically. Like the Celtics are sort of more the team that everyone's going after. But, Scotty Barnes was just like knocking guys out of the way and scoring around the basket. They're going with Yabusele as the backup center with Joel out. Andre Drummond hasn't looked great. Like the Raptors, I think, had like close to 50% offensive rebounds, and they have no rebounding. And then, like, they're also like very limited in terms of ball handling. There's no other ball handler that you trust. Reggie Jackson, Kyle Lowry, like these guys are probably pretty cooked. They brought Jared McCain is getting some time, but like now they're really small in the backcourt if they try to play all these guys. And so this is another game where the Raptors just like physically ran them off the floor, out efforted them. And I'm sure they'll look better with Joel Embiid and Paul George. Yes, like 2 of the top 12 players in the NBA statistically last year, including the best on a per play basis, going back in would be very useful. But I mean, it's all about the playoffs for Joe. We're gonna he'll play 55 games and Paul George will play 64. And no, they can't do that. They aren't good enough to do that. They'll be well below 500 if both those guys don't play. Like that is very obvious. They're going to be just as shitty as they were last year without Joel. So no, Joel's going to need to play. And that's not a great sign because I don't know if he can make it through the whole season. He certainly doesn't seem to think so, it seems, or he would have played already, you would guess. So, or maybe it's the medical staff, who knows? But like, yeah, I always say these rest programs are great. If you can do what Memphis is doing and actually win games while you're doing that. The Memphis thing is interesting. What do you think of that? What do you think of them just like not, playing guys like their stars like 27 minutes a game right now?
I think it's actually with the 6 and 9 days, 6 games in 9 days. Like I think it's pretty justified if they keep doing it after that. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of them as a deep team. Their bench has played better than I expected. I would be very interested in whether like there's like the kind of sports science, medical science is behind that. I mean, generally, if I think that the concept of the season is too long, the season is too many games that you can make things more, you can do things where you just play them fewer minutes. I'm intrigued by the concept.
Yeah, I am too. And I was like, my antenna went up after the first game because I'm like, okay, are these guys just like not healthy? Like what's going on? But number one, they have the 6 and 9 to start. Number two, like the guys have been effective, particularly because they've just been like playing really hard. And they just had depth that they believe in some. But I think the bigger thing is like the NBA season is too long. We've been saying that, like and particularly for a team that's had so many injury issues over the years, why not try this? I know, okay, maybe if you start losing a bunch of games, you got to play these guys more, do it. But like to start the season, like give it a shot and see if you can get, all right, we're going to play Ja for 26 minutes, but he's going to just be a monster in those 26 minutes right now. And, we got a good backup point guard in Scottie Pippen Jr. And, then Bane can take over and be the big emphasis when Ja is out of the game. So, yeah, I think, I mean, it's worth trying. And maybe that's how now you can get through the season. Maybe that's also Thomas. I already forgot his name again. Thomas Lasso. No, that's Ted Lasso. Hold on. What is his name? Isalo. Sorry. Thomas Isalo. Lisalo. I will remember that. So Thomas Lisalo. Maybe that he's bringing that over from Europe as well, because this is like kind of more of a EuroLeague 10-man rotation. Nobody plays more than half the game or so. It doesn't make sense to play guys because usually your bench and your starters are just much more equivalent in the EuroLeague because you don't really have superstars the way you do here because all the best players who are true outliers are playing in the NBA. But yeah, that I think it's worth trying. I really am interested to see how this experiment evolves, because maybe that's how you can actually play guys all 82 games is just by playing them like 27 minutes a game, even your stars. Interested to see it. Let's see here. Max says, thoughts on Najee Marshall bringing the ball up on second unit and Kyrie coming off of pin downs? What's the theory? I think that Kyrie is a better off-ball player. Like, he's not a great just like pick and roll player and distributor. He's really improved his off-ball game, but he's not actually that great going one-on-one, getting separation anymore. He doesn't get to the foul line a lot. He's never been, a great pick and roll operator. So I think he's actually better off the ball. And I imagine that he's asking this question because it didn't work very well last night against Phoenix. I didn't see that game, but I think it's not crazy to do that way. Time to panic for Denver. What do you think? Kyle asked that.
Not yet, but it could be coming.
So last night, again, I didn't see the game, but Russell Westbrook was 0 for 8. He is now 2 for 18 on the season. Like, last night was really more about the just terrible bench offense, like the way that we thought that they might struggle. Jamal Murray at least, had 21 points against what is a good Clippers defense, by the way. And Jokic, he just started bombing threes. He's actually 7 of 12 from 3. That's how he got to his 41 points. But did have 5 turnovers, only 4 assists. So I think it will be interesting to watch Jokic's 2-point shooting percentage, because that's like, if he's not shooting a good percentage from 2, that probably means that it's just because there's absolutely no spacing. And yeah.
Well, I mean, I brought up how we might be soon. They play at Toronto and at Brooklyn Monday and Tuesday. If they lose either of those games, I will start freaking out. Not like the big, like they're not going to make the playoffs, but like something might be wrong here, at least temporarily.
Yeah, and just the vibes out of there haven't been great either. Just in terms of like, there have been so many discussions like, all right, Michael Malone and Calvin Booth like don't agree on how to build a team, and Malone wants more veterans. I mean, I don't know, you did get some veterans, right? Like, and Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric have both been terrible so far. Like, Westbrook, just if he's going to just be horrible, like, I thought he could actually give them something. We'll see. I mean, this is in theory should have been a revenge game for him against the Clippers, and he that wasn't too great. But yeah, Clippers have been very competitive early on, more so than I thought they would be. So yeah, maybe they'll be like 500 when Kawhi comes back in March.
My heart is sad now.
Which rookies have impressed so far? I mean, Jalen Wells just looking like he has a pulse for a second rounder is good. Also, Iguodala has been done. Like, those guys have at least, any rookie who looks like they can play at all is
Klingon being big, but doing well being big. I think that's been good.
Yeah, I mean, Reed Shepherd just hasn't really done anything. I got all excited.
I cracked up because you had sent an angry G chat to a group about like
Reed Shepherd. I was angry.
Well, Reed Shepherd hitting 2 threes at the beginning of the game and then basically like being gone. I was like, yeah, that's true.
Well, yeah, because I was like, oh, here it goes. Because I was watching the first half of that Memphis Houston game. I'm like, all right, here it goes. Reed Shepherd finally getting off. He just hit 2 threes in a row. And then I looked at his stats. He was like, oh, he had 6 points. That was it. I just saw everything that he did.
Yeah.
In the game right there.
Yeah.
All right, let's pack it in here. We're going to head down to the arena and see those very same Clippers against the Warriors. And then a couple more Warriors games. We had a couple Warriors games in the chat or questions in the chat. I think their defense is very legitimate. We'll see about the offense. They're getting up a ton of threes, though. I want to see what they look like against a real team. So we're going to see them 3 times in the next 4 days, I guess, at home. So thanks so much for joining. And also, I want to remind everyone, too, we still have a little bit more time on our season opening deal for Dunked On Prime. So you can use the code preseason24, get 35% off a year membership. If you're willing to make that commitment to us, we are willing to give you an awesome discount. And that's 35% off of what the yearly rate would normally be, which already is a huge discount versus month by month. I mean, you're probably saving almost, you're saving more than 50% off being a monthly subscriber by using that code preseason24 for a year. So it is a great deal, and it will be going away pretty shortly. But as long as people are still signing up for it, I'll probably leave it open for a couple more days. All right, thanks for joining us. Talk to you all next time.